All right, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us today. We've opened in the room and we're admitting people as they come by. Um, Thank you for joining us in today's training. It is great to have you all joining us. My name is Elizabeth Merced, the Program Manager for the AAPI Strong California program, operated under the California Asian Pacific Chamber of Commerce, and I will be moderating this live training for you today. So if you're joining us for the first time, AAPI Strong is part of the national AAPI Strong movement led by our longtime friend and partner, National ACE. Together, our goal is to connect the AAPI community, including our small business owners throughout the United States with resources to combat discrimination while also finding solutions together. These solutions have taken the form of these trainings and roundtable series that we've hosted since the start of the year. If you'd like to learn more, visit our website, calasiancc.org, AAPI Strong, and we'll be sharing with that in the chat. Now, today, with our partners, Impact Foundry and the Sacramento MBDA COVID-19 Specialty Center, we bring you Strength Through Resilience, the impacts of AAPI in our community, with Mr. Jim Tabuchi. And today's session will focus on storytelling. We'll reflect back on the changes that the Asian American community have faced, what they have endured, and how they have succeeded. We will feature true stories of successful Asian Americans and the setbacks from previous generations and decades to current times. This session is intended to be inspirational in demonstrating how far we've come and what we have achieved. Now joining us to facilitate the training is Jim Tabuchi, best described as the serial social entrepreneur. Throughout his career, he has held numerous positions in the areas of consulting services, customer support, strategic planning, and international business. Mr. Tabuchi is the program director for the Next Gen Empower You program. And these days, Mr. Tabuchi dedicates his time and energy to the leadership development of young professionals. Now, we do have a special message from our sponsors.
Together with the Cal Asian Chamber of Commerce, we're taking a stand with the Asian American and Pacific Islander community, including our employees, customers, and anyone who has been affected by anti-Asian hate. The violence against the AAPI community serves as an urgent reminder that we need to dismantle systemic racism and confront explicit and implicit bias that prevents us from creating a truly equitable world. As we push for progress, Verizon has committed $10 million to accelerate social justice across the AAPI community and joins as a proud sponsor of the AAPI Strong California program.
At PG&E, we have a very long history and a valued partnership with the Cal Asian Chamber. Our mission is to support people, the planet, and the prosperity of California customers and communities. The AAPI Strong California Project's leadership and its focus on anti-bias, anti-harassment, and violence prevention work for AAPI businesses is a model program in California. We look forward to continue our long historic partnership and supporting our AAPI Strong California project.
Supporting AAPI small businesses is one of our core focus because we understand their role in helping local communities thrive. Unfortunately, they have been hit especially hard during the pandemic due to the rise in anti-Asian hate and violence. As a sponsor of the Cal Asian Chamber of Commerce AAPI Strong California program, this project will provide the tools they need to speak up, protect themselves, combat bias, harassment, and violence. So as we emerge from this pandemic together, we will emerge AAPI Strong.
And thank you again to our sponsors, the PepsiCo Foundation, Verizon, East West Bank, PG&E, and Ease, for their support and helping and pave the way for a better and safer future. Now, before we dive any further, I do have a few housekeeping notes. Today's session will be recorded and distributed for viewing post-conference. If you have any questions, please use the Q&A function or the chat function below. If you have any technical questions, please reach out to me directly via the chat function. And if you have any follow-up questions, please contact me directly at emercet@calasiancc.org. I'll provide that in the chat. Well, without further ado, everyone, please join me in welcoming Jim Tabuchi.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Tabuchi, and I'm very thankful to be here to present on behalf of the Cal Asian Chamber and with cooperation with Impact Foundry. And I just want to thank you for inviting me to present on this important API Strong session. I've attended most of the sessions already provided through these webinars and have found them to be very inspirational in everything having to do with combating anti-Asian hate. And just to put all of this in perspective, I don't know if you've seen the news from just yesterday, but Attorney General Rob Bonta said, he made the statement that there's no place for hate in California. He also reported that anti-Asian hate crimes increased 177% from 2020 to 2021. And this amounted to 240 reported incidents. What he also said was that that's definitely underreporting, because incidents have been occurring that either have not been reported or have not been recognized as being anti-Asian hate crimes. So today we're going to talk about this whole concept of API Strong in a slightly different way. This isn't going to be a big presentation or anything like this. It's really just going to be a conversation about stories of Asian American resilience, which will really demonstrate the source of strength within our Asian American community. Before talking about this and sharing the stories, I'd like to just introduce myself a little bit more. We can move to the next slide. So I've been given this title as a serial social entrepreneur. It was actually given to me by a couple of people. One is David Hosley, who's the former general manager of KVIE, and also Donnie Blumenstock, who's just been an amazing person within our community. And I talked to them because I've retired so many times in my life already, that they finally said, you know what, Jim, you're not retired, so just get rid of that title from your name, and we're going to give you this title as serial social entrepreneur. What that means is that I'm entrepreneurial in nature, which means that I like building things, building programs and products and so forth. But everything that I do is focused on social benefit. And then I do this continuously, right? So currently working on 3 or 4 different projects. That's always the case. I'll continue to do one thing and move on to the next at the same time. So what I've been working on recently is I'm the program director for the Next Gen Empower You program, which is focused on first and second generation Asian Americans and young adults. So the whole idea behind that is let's prepare the up and coming generation to then do great things in their lives and to be in leadership roles in the future. I'm also the program director for the Mandarin's Music Academy. So music has always been part of my life, and my hope has always been to continue to spread and give the gift of music around our community. So within that program, we have about 1,000 kids who are taking our music programs, and we think that through this program, we're going to help them develop into being scholar musicians, but also just contributors within the community. I'm also an executive consultant. I get called in to do executive coaching, leadership coaching, strategic alignment and development for organizations. Previously, I was the director of the Asian Chamber's Catalyst Leadership Development Program. And so it's really cool. We have out there now hundreds of people who graduated from that program who are now leading within the community and businesses around the region. I'm also formerly the president and CEO of the Sacramento Mandarins. So through my tenure there, we took the organization from being a small organization into one that is impacting the lives of thousands of kids every year today. And then prior to that, I'm actually formally trained as an electrical engineer. So that has nothing to do with what I'm doing right now, though, other than it's given me kind of a way to think about business and a way to think about organizations in that really analytic way. But I was able to rise through very quickly within senior management within Hewlett Packard. And as part of that, I was the worldwide marketing manager. And prior to that, I was the Asia Pacific region manager. And so what that did was it gave me an opportunity to travel all throughout Asia. I lived and worked in Asia for 3 years, based out of Hong Kong. And monthly, I would travel to China, Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Malaysia, India, Indonesia, Philippines, Australia, you name it, all throughout Asia. And so that's really where I developed a lot of my understanding about Asian cultures and realizing that, yes, we are not a monolithic culture, that there are nuances all throughout the region, and each of us have our own distinct histories and backgrounds associated with it. So enough about me, but I did want to say that, you know, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a Asian sociologist or anything like that, but I do have experience that I want to bring to bear in these areas. So enough about me. Today's session is all about Asia Pacific stories. And when I first proposed this as a possibility for the session, the first question was, well, you know, why stories, right? Most of the time we have presentations that are put together and it's information sharing. And I thought about this because stories are really it's the way that we learn, right? And if you think back, think back to the beginning of time when people actually got together, right? They probably sat in circles. They sat around maybe a fire that was there as they're keeping warm. They shared a meal. They ate together. They probably drummed, right? I know for me and drumming, that's a big thing on the musical side. But what they did was they passed down their history from generation to generation. And that's how they taught and they learned and they shared with each other. So what I thought today was, rather than doing a big presentation, and by the way, I hate slides, right? So you'll see very few slides from me. It really is about conversations. And so what we're going to talk about is the history of overcoming hardships through family, through hard work, through perseverance, and through resilience. And so one of the things that I think you'll see throughout this is that there's going to be commonality that's seen from these stories. So where this all stems from is, if you look at a study that was done by, her name was Angela Lee Duckworth. Has anybody ever heard of her? Right. She did this amazing TED Talk that was just a number of years ago. She's a second-generation Chinese American, and she is a trained psychologist, not me, of course. But what she determined and this was through a research of looking at children, was that one of the main determinants for success of that individual is this thing called grit. Okay, and she described grit as being more important than IQ, which is, you know, normally what you're born with, right? She defined grit as being passion and perseverance for long-term goals. And so today we're going to talk about how many Asian Americans develop grit by enduring huge obstacles in their lives and persevere to succeed. All right. So before we get started with the stories, I want to make this as interactive as possible. So we all know that, you know, as Asian Americans, there are stereotypes, right? We're stereotypically very good listeners, passive listeners, in fact, and really good students, right? So for this session, there is going to be a test, all right? You're each going to be tested on this. And all throughout, I'm going to ask for your participation. And at the end, I'm going to ask you to share your stories and also key takeaways, all right? So take notes, jot notes, put it in the chat, all right? So here's what I ask. Part of your participation here is I want to see your faces, right? I don't want to see these black boxes with just names in it. Thank you for turning on your cameras, right? And some of you I know very well, so it's great to see your faces again. And we're going to start off by, you know, just going through a few different chat questions. So again, those of you who I just see your names in black boxes, please feel free to turn on your cameras so we can have interaction today. And the first thing I'm going to ask you in chat is, what do you consider your country of origin or your heritage? Right? So for me, I'm Japanese American. Just go ahead and type out what you believe your country of origin is in chat. All right. And by the way, I hope I'm asking the question correctly. I know that, you know, I don't want to be as rude as some people have asked me in the past. They said, what are you? Right? Where are you from? Right? I'd be like, I'm from Stockton. No, where are you? Where are you from? Right? So I'm going to go ahead and just, I'm going to apologize up front, right? That I'm probably going to use wrong words during this session. I'm just going to ask for your forgiveness beforehand. I'm trained as an electrical engineer. I took one Asian American Studies class when I was at UC Berkeley from Professor Takagi. And I actually took it pass, not pass, right? And that's because I'm an engineer, right? And so I barely passed the class because I fell asleep during the final exam. Okay? And I was studying for my physics final before that. I pulled an all-nighter and I fell asleep in my exam. Fortunately, I woke up enough to, you know, finish off the essays, and so I actually did pass the class. Thank you all for chiming in. I really like the chat that's coming in. You can scroll in and see the huge diversity that we have in the room. It's just fantastic to see. That's one of the great things about being in California and Sacramento in general, was just seeing the diversity that we have. Really great to see. Thank you for everybody chatting. Now I'd like you to identify the generation that you most identify with. And I know that it tends to be vague about this, but I'll put in some definitions here and go ahead and chime in with either first, second, third, fourth generation, maybe fifth, right, for some of you. So we'll define first generation as being the first immigrant group that had come into America. So if you were born in another country and you immigrated to the United States, you would be first generation. If your parents were born here, then you'd be second generation. If you were born here and your parents were born here as well, then you'd be third generation. So for me, I'm actually third generation. My parents were born here, and then my grandparents actually came from Japan, all four of them actually. So I'm third generation Japanese American. Some of you may actually be mixed, right? So for example, my wife Joanne, her mother was born in Japan. Her father was born in San Francisco. So she could really be kind of 2.5. But which generation do you mostly kind of gravitate towards, or where's your thinking, I would say, right? So you could either be, first, second, third generation based on that, right? All right. So again, we have quite a mix here. Everywhere from first generation to fourth generation. That's great. So I could actually be almost fourth generation myself. My grandmother was actually born in Hawaii back in 1900. So some say I'd be like 3 1/4, but I tend to think that I'm more third generation. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started with some of these stories. I do want to preface it by saying that I'm just going to be sharing a few of the stories. There are really probably millions of stories that can be shared of just Asian Americans, and each one of you has multiple stories that you can share, and so some of these stories are old, turn of the century, some are a generation ago, and some of the stories are very common or very current. But the main thing is that there's really underlying commonalities across all of these stories. Right? The first story that I'm going to share is actually a very personal one to me. And it's the Japanese American experience of my own family. And so I'm going to share a little bit of my family history with you that goes all the way back to my grandparents. So my grandfather was the first one to arrive here in the US. And he first arrived on Wednesday, April 18th, 1906. All right. Now, how do I know this? I grew up never having met my grandfathers. I had met my grandmothers, but never my grandfathers. When my grandparents passed away, when some of my uncles and aunts started passing away, all of a sudden I started getting bags and boxes of stuff, right? I'm the youngest of all of the cousins in my family, but for some reason, people started sending me things. They were giving me the photographs, the artifacts, everything. And so I had to wade through this. And by the way, my whole dining room table is full of all these different artifacts. And one of the things that I found was on April 18th, 1906, there's a embarkation card for my grandfather. And that's the date that he arrived. So April 18th, 1906 is a very significant date in American history, right? Can anybody guess what that might be? What happened in 1906? Go ahead and put that in chat or unmute, and you can speak out if you think you know the answer. This is like a Final Jeopardy question. All right, 1906, what happened? I'll give you a clue. It happened on the West Coast. Something happened. And it was very disastrous. Earthquake, Curtis, you got it. The Great San Francisco Earthquake. That happened on April 18th, 1906, the day my grandfather arrived in America. Right. Fortunately, his ship didn't land in San Francisco. It actually landed in Vancouver, Canada. But shortly after that, he migrated down to San Francisco. So the whole story behind this was that my grandfather was sent by his father, my great grandfather, with a bunch of barrels of soy sauce, and he was sent over by ship. He was supposed to sell the soy sauce and then bring the money back to Japan with him. So it's a little business venture, right? Well, as the story went, before he could get off the ship and retrieve the barrels of soy sauce, somebody had stolen them. And so he arrived in America with $75 and no money, no soy sauce, and he was basically disgraced, right? So there's no way he could go back to Japan empty-handed, right? My great-grandfather would probably think that he spent or gambled the money away, right? So my grandfather had to figure out how he was going to make money to send back to Japan. So that's where he made his way to San Francisco, and that was one of the first, issues that he faced was, when he got to San Francisco, of course, everything's a mess, and he had to find a job. So what he did was, rather than going into the farms, which is where a lot of people did, he actually went to work in the city, and he was a dishwasher. So he washed dishes in the back of a restaurant, and was able to make his money that way. Soon after, because he'd have been educated in high school and in a business school, he actually met up with somebody who was involved in dry goods business, and together they opened up a dry goods business in Sacramento. And then shortly after that, he was able to expand that business and move to Stockton. So they eventually opened up Tabuchi's department store in Stockton in 1917, and the business really thrived. In fact, I have some of the tax returns from as far back as the 1930s, and there's a tax return in 1938 that showed that they had a net profit that they reported to the government of $8,000 in that year. So that was a net profit, right? That was a lot of money back then. So $8,000, just to put that in perspective, they could have bought a house, a brand new house every year, right? Hey, someone remembers Tabuchi's in Stockton. Thank you, Les, for remembering that. Yeah, and so they were making a lot of money, right? In fact, they were making enough money that they could actually buy the building that they would have the store in. So Bank of Stockton offered up the building to them, and they ended up buying it. So they were very prosperous, and in fact, during that time, I guess you could call them maybe middle class, upper middle class at that point. They had their beautiful home in South Stockton, and then World War II came, right? The bombing of Pearl Harbor. And some of you know that what happened there was that all of the Japanese Americans on the West Coast were sent to internment camps. And so for the Tabuchi family, they had a situation where only what they could carry could they bring into the camps. And they ended up going into the San Joaquin County Fairgrounds, which was converted from horse stables and was actually only about a mile away from their house. And so they ended up going from their beautiful home, their wonderful, successful business, and giving all of that up, and in fact, giving up their freedom to now go where they had to live within this internment camp. And then later on, they were transferred to Rower, Arkansas, where they were to remain. So one thing about my grandfather is that he was very optimistic, and even though he had everything taken away from him, including his freedom, he sat my father down in camp. So my father was about 15 years old at the time, and he told my father, he said, Shoji, it's my father's name, right? He said, wars only last for 3 years. And he said, get ready, because after the war is over, we're going to get out and make our business even better than ever. Right. And so even under that despair, my grandfather still had hopes for getting out and getting back to business again. So somehow, I don't know how my grandfather knew it, but he was right. The war lasted for 3 years, and then they were released from camp and were able to bring their family back home. Right. But here's what happened. 3 months after they arrived back at their home, my grandfather got very sick. My understanding was he was vomiting blood at that point, and they knew they had to take him to the hospital because it was very serious. They took him to the hospital, and he was refused service there. And they told him that because he was Japanese, that he could not be served. Right. So they took him to another hospital, and there was a nun there who decided that she was going to take him in. And so she admitted him into the hospital. My grandfather was bleeding during the time, and so he needed blood. And there were no donors. And in fact, one donor that was actually found at the University of Pacific was denied because he was on the football team. And Amos Alonzo Stagg, the coach, would not let him donate blood before a football game. So my aunt wrote that it was more difficult to beg for blood than it was even to beg for money. Shortly after that, my grandfather died. So 3 months after leaving camp, he passed away. There's something else that happened in camp and was never talked about, but it turns out that my grandfather's younger brother died in camp. And so he was 48 years old, and it was never spoken about within my family. So that was the hardship that had gone through our Tabuchi family on that side. Meanwhile, on my mother's side of the family was my aunt. So she was born in California, and she was sent to live in Japan. She's 15 years old and was working as a nurse's aide in a hospital. And so she was just getting ready to celebrate her 16th birthday in Japan, and which would have been the next day. And then the next day, a huge bomb hit, and it exploded nearby. And it turned out it was the first ever atomic bomb, because my aunt was in Hiroshima. Right. She was actually shielded by the blast, and she crawled from the rubble, and she was ordered to evacuate to a cave because they thought that might be safer for her. On the way, she saw a little girl who needed help, and so she picked up this little girl. She thought she was about 8 years old or so, who was severely injured, and the little girl died in her arms on the way to the cave. My aunt never forgot about those horrors, and lived through it all throughout. She moved to California, moved back to California. She got married. She had 5 children, and miraculously lived to be 87 years old here in California. And so these were some of the hardships that my family had gone through during World War II. And that has just become part of who I am, part of my history and part of my family story. There's one of the Japanese words that was just ingrained to me all throughout growing up. And anybody who's Japanese American, you might know this word. It's called gaman, and it's spelled Gaman if you use English letters. So loosely translated, it means persevere or endure. And so those internees who went into camp, they use that word frequently, gaman, right? In slang today, what would we say? Probably say, suck it up, right? Right? Endure, right? Toughen up, right? so my family stories really give me strength, and they give me appreciation, because I know that whatever happens to me, right, I could lose a job, I could have hardship, and really it will nowhere near pale in comparison to what my grandparents went through, what my parents went through, right? And so, in a sense, while I know that my family has gone through this hardship, it also gives me a lot of strength to move forward with a lot of confidence, and you know what Angela Lee Duckworth calls grit, right? And so that's our story from the Tabuchi family, and from both sides. I'd like to kind of you know change stories now and talk about Cambodian American experience. And this was a story that I had read about, and her name is Catharia I'll call her Dr. It's a lot easier to pronounce for me. She's actually a refugee scholar who's at UC Berkeley and is now the Associate Dean for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. She's originally from Cambodia. Her father was the Cambodian ambassador to Burma. And so the family lived in Burma, right? And then what happened was in 1975, Cambodia fell to the communists. So Burma recognized the new regime in Cambodia and deported her family from Burma. They couldn't go back to Cambodia, so the only place that would take them was Thailand. So they lived in Thailand for a short period, and then she was fortunate to be able to move from Thailand to San Diego. Meanwhile, she found out that every single one of her aunts, her uncles, and cousins, even as young as an 18-month-old toddler cousin, had perished during the genocide in Cambodia. So she lost her entire family except for her immediate family. And what she found out was that by moving to the United States, there really wasn't a Cambodian community that was here. And so they had to build everything. They had to build their temples, they had to build their community organizations, they had to put everything together. And so what she found was academics, or she said academics found her, right? And so she excelled in academics, even though, according to her statistics of Cambodian Americans, today, only about 14% of Cambodian Americans actually have a college degree. So what she brings out is this whole distinction behind the Asian model minority and the myth behind that, because we are seen as being monolithic. And of course, Asians are successful, right? And she really brings out that you know there's still a lot to be done in support of Asian Americans. And so her whole goal now is to empower youth to believe in themselves and to understand the stories of their upbringing. And so she wanted to share a number of different lessons. One of the lessons that she shared is that nothing is certain except uncertainty. And so what that means is that she's able to adapt to change. She's able to anticipate change. She also said that one can profoundly impact someone's life through small acts of kindness, just small acts of kindness. And this was demonstrated in my family as well, that, and we can all demonstrate that ourselves, is that a small act of kindness can go a long way to somebody who's in need. She also experienced nomadism, and not as an adventure like some of us think about today, but the fact that she had to go with only what she could carry and $10 in her pocket. And and so it's very difficult to recover from that kind of a restart in your life. And she believes that, you know, many values were instilled in her, Asian values such as modesty and humility. But she says, if you're quiet about your achievement, people just assume that you haven't done anything. Right? Really interesting. And I think a lot of us think that if we just work hard, if we just keep our head down and do good work and be loyal, that we're going to be recognized. And she brings out, no, you have to speak out, right? If you're quiet about your achievement, people just assume that you haven't done anything. So that's her story, and a lot of lessons behind that. More current is a story that I actually just ran into, and I have to keep this person's name and their location private because she actually did not want to talk about this, but I just wanted to share some of her story. She's Cambodian American. She came from Cambodia as a young girl. She owns a donut shop. She and her husband work very hard. Her husband wakes up at 1 o'clock every morning to make the donuts. He spends about 4 hours making donuts. He gets a little bit of sleep, and then he goes to his day job. Meanwhile, she wakes up and she sells the donuts during the morning until they sell out. She talks about her life being difficult, that when she was a young girl, her grandfather was taken away, was starved, and was eventually executed in Cambodia. And she tells the story about being hidden in the bushes during the day so that they could move at night when they wouldn't be seen, and how they were, you know, really starving and dying of thirst. So today she lives in a multi-generation family. She takes care of her 92-year-old mother who has dementia. And what she does is she places her hope in her son's hands, who's now going to college. And she hopes that, you know, someday he's going to be successful and will take care of the family just as she has been able to. So those are, you know, stories that are very current today. I want to kind of switch gears now and just provide a Chinese American story. And these are a couple of short stories of, you know, fairly recent immigrants, but and I don't go back to the 19s or 1800s or so on these. But I have a very dear friend named Lisa, and Lisa refers to herself as the API grandma. Right. Her family is originally from China, and she settled here in this region in Yolo County. She's talked to me, and I first came to know her after I heard about what happened with her. She reports that she's been physically assaulted 4 times, and she's been racially, verbally assaulted 9 times. All right. If you saw her, she's, you know, the most wonderful person, always happy, and for all of these things to happen to her, it's just atrocious what's happened. One of the times she was actually in Costco, and she was being physically attacked, being pushed with someone's shopping cart. So she had to use her shopping cart to defend herself. And so she kind of describes it, and she says, yeah, can you believe it? You know, I had to actually defend myself with the shopping cart, right? So she decided she wasn't going to stand it anymore. You know, she was tired of just, you know, putting up with it and not taking action. And so what she did was she put together her resources, her contacts, people that she knew, to take a stand. And the first thing that she did was she went to the city of Woodland, where she lives, and she lobbied with the city council so that they would actually write an anti-Asian hate resolution. Right? She then took that to Yolo County and had that resolution adopted there. She then took it to other municipalities and enlisted support from all the people that she knew through the American Leadership Forum, through AAPI. And Yen, I'm glad to see that you're here. You were probably involved in that as well. If you wouldn't mind, you can come off of mute and maybe share a little bit of, the play-by-play that happened there.
Yeah, I learned it through, she just happened to be an old friend as well. So, but then she did reach out because she belongs to a local chapter for AAPI.
Yeah.
Together, I learned so much more from her after this incident than I thought I knew her well, because, her husband and her actually friends of my husband. They went to college together. So, but I had no idea how strong she is and how, she's like incredible in the fact that she challenges would not deter her. I mean, she went above and beyond what, her body could do in order to fight back. And I don't mean just physically fighting back, but she has a plan right after she was confronted. And that's why I think I admire her the most, is that she, together, she worked relentlessly with leaders across, not just, in the region where she lives, but she has this vision of taking it to the national level, if she could. So she, using her experience, she transformed that into an effort where trying to get other people on board so that, the incident that she encountered will not happen again to other people of, of the Asian, heritage. And so as a result, we work together in, pretty much city by city to get the resolution for, from each of the, office that we tried to reach out to. And she was very successful, actually. I last time I checked with her, there was quite a few resolutions coming up from various cities throughout the country. And I don't know where she is right now in that effort, but I know that it's gone quite far. Haven't had a chance to check back in her, but
yeah, my understanding is that within 90 days, right, 3 months, right, within 90 days, there were already 10 municipalities and districts that had already adopted the resolution. So kudos to her, right? Perfect example of API Strong and taking something that was very hurtful and making something good out of it.
exactly.
Yeah. Perfect example of API Strong, right? Another example, and this is a live one, right? A good friend named Ben, he owns a restaurant here in Sacramento. It's called Vegan Deadly Sins, right? So it's a Chinese vegan restaurant. Never ate at one before, but was introduced to his restaurant. His family originates from Hong Kong, and they left there just prior to the Hong Kong handover to China in 1997. They brought over with them, what they could carry. And his mother eventually opened up a vegan restaurant in San Francisco. So he decided he was going to move to Sacramento and open up a restaurant here. So he did. So he opened up Vegan Deadly Sins. Just last month, a man came along carrying a hammer and broke every single one of their windows. So they're on this corner, big plate glass windows, broke every single one of the windows, just went along and broke every one. He caused over $70,000 in damage. And Ben believes it's racially motivated, even though the person didn't spray paint anything, didn't write anything. It turns out that the same person also broke every window in a Indian-owned pizza parlor. And so they have a video of the same person doing the exact same thing. So this is an example where he believes it's racially motivated, although it's not reported as such. And so when we look at the statistics, there's probably a big underreporting that's there. The other thing about Ben was that he was closing up his business one night. This was before the hammer, went through the window and all that. Weeks before that, he was actually assaulted. And so he's closing up the business out on the sidewalk, and someone came from behind and hit him in the face, knocked him to the ground, and continued to just kick him while he was down, right? Fortunately, those of you who know bystander training, there was a bystander who was there, and it was actually somebody who was driving in their car. And fortunately, the driver in the car honked his horn, just repeatedly honked the horn to get that person's attention. That person eventually ran off, and so Ben was saved that way. So Ben made this known that he was assaulted and that his business was vandalized like that, and approached me, and I made arrangements for Kelly Fong Rivas. Kelly Fong Rivas is formerly the chief of staff for Mayor Steinberg, and is just now appointed as the diversity and inclusion advisor to the mayor. And so what she did was she offered up resources from the police and the downtown partnership to help Ben, get his business back together, to help it appear stronger from the outside and less vulnerable to further damage. And so this is a current situation of, some negative things that happen to Chinese Americans, but they're trying to make some good come out of it. Right. There's another, this is the last story that I'll share is a story about a Vietnamese American. And actually it comes from this book here. It's called Perfume Dreams. If anybody's interested in taking a look at this. It's called Perfume Dreams, and his name is Andrew Lam. And it's a recent book that's out, but he talks about when he was 11 years old, he and his family boarded a plane to Guam in April of 1975. So it was 2 days before Saigon fell. And prior to that, he was just a little boy reading comic books. That was his hobby. And the next day he was running for his life, bringing only what he could carry, which was a small backpack. Right? He was asked by his mother prior to evacuating to take all of the pictures that they had, all of their records, diplomas, anything that they had of significance, and to take it in the back and burn it, right? Which he did, right? So he burned everything, burned film, pictures, everything, right? And to this day, he has nightmares and regrets about that because he feels like he could have loaded up his backpack rather than taking comic books, and he could have taken his history with him. Instead, he did what he felt was right, and he listened to his mother and burned their history. So one of the things that he talked about was that when he came over here, he didn't have a roadmap of how to navigate within America. They didn't know what the American narrative was. They didn't have a history here. And he felt that he didn't have a history because he had burned that. And so he says that invisibility seemed to be their fate, right? So now fast forward, and he's making a very positive life with himself, and the Vietnamese Americans, many have now risen to become very successful elected officials, scientists, and business leaders. But Andrew Lam, he shared some lessons from his refugee experience. And here's what some of them are. One of them is rise early, right? He learned this when he was in the camp. He said, be first to everything. And he learned this from being in the food line, right? The next one was listen carefully. He says, the new reality is upon you, and it requires new flexibility and courage, right? Similar to Dr. right? She said, be prepared. Right? The next thing was be fierce. Do not let others take advantage of you. This is what API Strong is all about, right? Do not show that you are weak. In the worst circumstances, the weak get left out, beaten, or robbed. Arm yourself if you can. People can sense that you're willing to fight for what you have, and most will back away. Now, first of all, I don't want to necessarily promote physical violence, right? That really is a last resort in defense. And even then, for me personally, right, I took a self-defense class when I was in middle school. My father brought me to this. And my sensei told me, he said, the strongest muscles in the human body are in your legs, right? You don't know enough, right? If you get confronted, you run away, right? So that's the first thing to do, right? So you can run if you need to. Andrew Lamb went on to say, be alert, find out what is coming down the line. Always get more than you need, because what you have could be traded or given to the elderly. He said, be hopeful, similar to my grandfather, right? Never give up hope. Hug your family as often as you can. Don't hate. Hatred consumes oppressed and oppressors alike. Then he said, learn to love. Those who have suffered along with you, for their suffering and yours are now part of your inheritance. It's a very, very wise words from Andrew Lamb. So this is our chance to kind of open up. We have a few minutes here. And one of the biggest challenges that I had in bringing these stories forward to you is that there are literally millions that are out there, right? There are Filipino American stories, there are Hmong American stories, Korean American, Indian American, Pacific Island American, just a number of different stories that could be told. And now I'd like it to open it up, right? If anybody here within the audience has a story that you'd like to share, we have a few minutes and would be welcome to understand your story and what you have learned about your history and what you can share with all of us. Do we have anybody who'd be willing to share? Please don't be shy.
Yeah, I can speak up a little bit. I'm a first generation Vietnamese American, so I connected with you sharing that story about Andrew Lam, his struggle.
Yeah.
I certainly came over from Vietnam, boat refugee, really struggled a bit trying to fit into the culture. I spent 10 years in Illinois. I had an American foster family. So I was pushed to really be mainstream, right? Mainstream. At the time, either you are, to be successful, you have to do that. I even changed my name. It was really Kung Lei. So to be mainstream, I Americanized even my name to fit in. So there was a little bit of subtle, that was in the 81 when I first came over. So the Vietnam War was still very fresh. And until I joined the military, obviously, after college, and my foster parents was a little shocked. They said, why did you join? I said, no, my dad was in South Vietnamese Army, and I feel part of the real thing is to pay back and join the military. And but they were professors. They were a bit more liberal in their thinking, and they wasn't much into the conservative values. But I grew up, conflicting a bit, with, I was born, raised Catholics and had that upbringing. So that's, so that was a little bit of tension there. And I didn't know, especially now you can see what's happening with the Roe versus Wade. But the thing is, yes, I mean, there was always that bit of tension, conservative Catholics values with what's going on with the liberal. And so that's the things I kind of struggle a bit and with my kind of what's going on, a little bit of politics. But I'm just thinking that there's going to be always tension. Sometimes we say it's racial, but this is I think it's just because we have certain upbringings, certain things we bring to carry on to these countries, and certainly whatever our background, our beliefs. they may come in conflict with what's going on. So that's what I would share for this.
Thank you, Wayne, and thank you for your service. Which
Thank
branch of the military did you serve?
Navy.
Navy.
So I was I retired 2 years ago. After 30 years, I was on active and reserve in the Navy. So in San Diego. So this is kind of my hometown here. Yep.
Wow, wonderful. And what
Thanks.
what rank did you retire in?
Commander.
Commander.
05. Yeah.
Wow.
Thanks.
Congratulations. Thank you again for your service, and thank you for speaking
Thank you,
out.
Jim. Yes.
Yeah.
Appreciate what you shared. I also did consulting for the government for about 10 years. Currently, I'm a high school teacher, but I mean, I did that for a number of years too. So I appreciate what you're doing too. So thanks for your service as well.
Oh, you're welcome. Wow, a high school teacher. I would love to be
Yes.
in your class. That would be wonderful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Yen, did I see you come off mute?
Oh, I didn't mean, but yeah, I can share. Well, hats off to Wayne, by the way. It's really touching to hear your story, and I think okay, I'm going to share my story. I'm Chinese, but I was born and raised in Vietnam. I felt that I've always struggled with my own identity because growing up in Vietnam as Chinese, my parents would not allow us to speak Vietnamese when we were inside the house. So so my first language was Chinese. However, when I go to school, I struggled really because I wasn't accepted as Vietnamese in school because I'm Chinese, right? But then at home, my dad is trying to protect this Chineseness in us and saying that you guys need to talk to each other in Chinese, or, you're not going to be able to speak Chinese at all growing up. So we had to do that. So I kind of split my personality in a way. The minute we walk into the house, we just talked. However, with my siblings, I would be talking to them in Vietnamese because that was faster, because that's what we speak in school. And then, so by the time we get here, I was like, and especially when now I've had the opportunity to come back and go to both took my family to China and Vietnam. When we were in China, I felt like I'm not Chinese. But then when I went to Vietnam, I said, I'm not Vietnamese either. And now I kind of adopt the fact that, okay, I guess I am American. But then as I learned more about the history and the things and, fighting for equality, I was like shocked to learn of all the things that we've done, in the past, because before I came here, I thought, this country is the greatest one of all, and, freedom everywhere. We fought so hard for the freedom what we had, and then to learn. So it's like, it's a constant learning and adjusting and transforming myself into things that I feel comfortable with. And I don't know when that, level of comfort I will reach, but so all I can do is really stay true to what I believe in, and then just go with that. Doesn't matter what nationality I think I belong. So
yeah, thank you, Yan. And what I know about you is that you're continuously adapting and learning and contributing. So thank you for that. Yeah. I want to share a little secret. In the audience is Dorothy Nishioka, and Dorothy is one of my mother's dearest friends. I believe you've been friends for probably, my guess, over 50 years. Yes. One of the amazing things is that there's a famous photograph that was taken by Dorothea Lange. Dorothea Lange was one of the top 3 most famous photographers in the country. And she took a photo of my father and Dorothy's husband in camp. And I think at the time they were probably 14, 15 years old. And it's one of my most prized possessions is having that photograph. And so, Dorothy, I know that, you have camp experience, and I don't know if you would like to share or not, but
yeah, I'll go ahead and say something.
Please do.
I am soon to be 87, so I have a long history. And Jim's mother has been one of my best friends for 60 years now.
60 years.
So I just wanted to say that I was born in 1935. So when the war broke out, I was 6 years old. And I could just pick up bits and pieces of what was going on. No one, sat me down and talked to me about it. But that was probably the worst time of my life, was when the war broke out. Pearl Harbor was bombed and the war broke out. And we did not go into camp because we were inland near the Idaho border. So, I feel terrible for the people who were interned and to have to think about what to do with their property and what they could carry. And I just can't even imagine it. But on the other hand, we who didn't go to camp endured all of the prejudice that was out there during the war. And of course, afterwards, it didn't just suddenly disappear just because the war was over. So it was very hard times for me. My siblings didn't talk about it that much, but I had many friends just in that 6-month period that I was in first grade. But I ended up leaving that school in 6th grade, and I have one friend left who was Mexican American. And I was told that, by some of my white friends that they couldn't play with me. So that's how that ended up. And then I moved to another town where, for some reason, I was accepted. And I worked really hard to try to fit into the white population of the school. But I had a very successful, what I think was successful career in education. And I didn't have a lot of explicit, what I could say was explicit bias. But there were times when I think it was implicit bias when I'd asked myself, would that person have said that to me if I were white? And I would have to say probably not. There weren't that many instances, but there were enough. Now, at this time, I'm finishing up a presidency of a women educators group. And I'm happy to say that we have a DEI committee. So we have an interest group. We meet twice a month and discuss many topics that are part of the DEI. And I'm just happy to feel like I'm kind of up to date on what is going on. And so many businesses and institutions and schools and hospitals are embracing the DEI theory. So that's where I am today, retired and finishing up this presidency. But it's been kind of a long haul. And at this moment, with all the anti-Asian incidences going on in our country, I honestly have to say that sometimes I think when I'm crossing a street, some crazy person could just run me down. You just never know. So there is that. It's not a huge fear, but it's kind of in the back of my mind. But I'm going to try to give a talk to my DEI group about this anti-Asian hate that's going on, which is unbelievable, among so many other things. Yes. But thank you, Jim. Thank you so much for my being able to be here and hear you speak. I'm really kind of stunned. Jim was always this little boy.
So Dorothy knew me as Jimmy when I was probably 2 years
Born,
old.
when you were
Yeah,
born.
when I was born. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Dorothy, for being here. Yeah. What I'd like to do now, unless there are others who want to share, I don't want to rush us along, but would somebody else like to share? Okay. I'd like to do this. So at the beginning, I said that there was going to be a test, right? I'm holding good to that, right? So here it is. I'd like you to write your key takeaway from this session. So a key takeaway is something that you learned or realized that you'll remember today and into the future, right? I'll give you a couple minutes, but I'd like you to just jot this down into the chat, right? And here's the thing about it. You're thinking about it. When you write it down, then you're more likely to remember it. And when you share it with all of us, then we all have your key takeaway. All right, is anybody typing in there? The Asian American experience is very diverse, yet share a common immigrant experience. Great. Yes. Stories are history, yeah. Know your history, know yourself. Each of us has a story to tell. Our journey in life shapes our perception and teaches us to adapt and find our happiness. Wow. Our stories hold our identity. Isn't that true? We all share the same kind of stories. Mine is similar to yours. Yeah. I think some of you might also be like how I was before, that I actually did not know my story. I didn't know my family background until I actually started digging and learning about it. So I'd encourage those of you who don't know your story or your history to go back and learn and ask questions, right? Especially those who are still alive, right? So I encourage you, each of you, to learn your own story, right? To share your story, right? Write it down, share it with others. When you understand it, then write it down and make sure that others know it as well. And most importantly, understand what you and your family have gone through, because that really is the strength of your family and the strength of your background. And through that will help you to develop that grit. And in this word that we're talking about here, to be truly API strong. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back to Elizabeth. And if you can help to close us out, that would be great.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you to everyone who was able to share. I know sometimes it's not easy to share, right? And to open up and be a little vulnerable, right? But I do thank each and every one of you for that shared under here today in this conversation. Wayne just added, we live in a diverse culture. It is best to learn to communicate well and adapt to overcome struggles. I like Andrew Lamb's experience of putting love first above self. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Wayne. And thank you again to everyone for your participation in today's session. And a thank you to our sponsors as well, the PepsiCo Foundation, Verizon, East West Bank, PG&E, and EASE, and our partners, Impact Foundry, and the Sacramento MBDA COVID-19 Specialty Center, National ACE, for their contributions and their support to this initiative. I'd quickly like to make an upcoming event announcement. This conversation was great today, and we'll continue to have more conversations, regarding, the API community. Our next session is Asian American Mental Health, Trauma, and Healing. So be sure to join us on Tuesday, July 19th at 1 p.m. We're bringing this back by popular demand. It was really popular the first time around in February. And so we've been asked to bring this back for everyone that either wants to revisit the training or for the ones that couldn't make it. We'll discuss with our participants, to learn new ways to address mental health trends, the stigma and trauma experienced by the API community. And together we'll find new ways to access support and address mental health needs within our communities. This will not be like a therapeutic session, but it is an educational one, so that we can all learn, something new, what may be holding some of us back from reaching out. And a big thank you again for your support. And we do look forward to more conversations in the future.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.